Everybody tells you a motorcycle is a depreciating asset. Ride it off the lot. Watch the value evaporate. Mostly true. But 15 bikes on this list did the opposite. Production stopped. Emissions laws killed the engine. Riders ignored them, then suddenly did not. These are not million-dollar auction unicorns nobody watching will ever own. These are machines a regular person bought new, and today could be sitting on genuine profit. Let's find out which ones, and more importantly, why. Because the why is about to repeat itself 14 more times. Climbing quietly at number 15, Suzuki GS1000. Back in 1978, Suzuki finally built a big four-cylinder that did not try to copy Kawasaki. Lighter frame, sharper handling, a genuinely reliable engine underneath it all. Nobody was excited about it at the time because it looked sensible, and sensible does not sell magazines or win arguments at the bar. It got quietly overshadowed for decades by louder, flashier machines from every other manufacturer, and for most of its life, it sat in classifieds priced like scrap metal, waiting for somebody to notice what it actually was underneath the boring bodywork. The engine is a 997 cubic centimeter air-cooled inline-4. Original price was $2,700. Clean, unmolested examples today are trading between $6,000 and $8,000, which is not life-changing money, but it is a genuine multiple on a bike most people assumed was worthless. Why did it climb? Because it was the first truly modern handling Japanese superbike, and restorers eventually figured that out decades after everyone else moved on to newer machines entirely. It actually beat far more expensive competition around a road course in period testing, not just on a spec sheet somewhere. Scarcity of unmodified originals, since most were raced, chopped, or turned into cafe projects, is doing the heavy lifting here. Finding one that has not been butchered into somebody's weekend build is genuinely hard now, and getting harder every year as the survivors quietly disappear into private collections, often never to be listed publicly again once a serious buyer gets their hands on one. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The GS1000S, the West Cooley blue and white factory replica colorway, introduced not long after launch, quietly sells for nearly double what a standard GS1000 goes for, and most sellers listing theirs online right now genuinely have no idea they're sitting on it. The color runs deeper than most buyers realize, and once you know what to look for, spotting that specific blue and white scheme in a blurry online listing photo becomes almost second nature. Vanishing legally at number 14, Yamaha RD400. This is where emissions regulations become the villain of our story, and they are going to keep showing up. So pay close attention to the pattern forming here because it repeats constantly throughout this entire list. The RD400 was a screaming two-stroke twin that could embarrass much bigger, much pricier four-strokes. Off the line at a stoplight without even trying particularly hard to do it. The engine is a 398cc air-cooled two-stroke twin. It's stickered new at roughly $1,100, genuinely affordable for a young rider back then. Practically an entry-level price point for the era. Today, good running examples sell for $6,000 to $9,000, and truly pristine ones climb considerably higher than that range suggests once bidding wars start. The reason is brutally simple. Two-stroke street bikes were basically legislated out of existence in America by the mid-'80s. And it was not a gradual fade, it was a hard stop, permanent, with no exceptions carved out for anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances. Every RD that survives today is a finite artifact of a banned technology that simply cannot be manufactured again under current rules, no matter how much demand exists for it in the current market. Before we go further, hit subscribe right now, because knowing which categories get legislated out of existence is genuinely how you predict which bikes appreciate 5 or 10 years down the road, long before the rest of the market catches on and prices adjust accordingly. And that exact pattern is about to show up again in a bike so notorious it earned a nickname involving death itself. which should tell you something about how bad things actually got before regulators stepped in and shut the whole category down for good. Faking convincingly at number 13, Kawasaki KZ1000 Eddie Lawson replica. Kawasaki built a limited run street bike painted to match Eddie Lawson's championship-winning AMA Superbike livery. At the time, it was just a cool paint scheme slapped onto an already aging platform, and dealers discounted them heavily just to clear inventory off the showroom floor before the next model year arrived. The engine is a 998 cubic centimeters, air-cooled inline-4, making around 100 horsepower. Original MSRP was approximately $3,800. Today, verified original ELRs are selling for $15,000 to $20,000, occasionally more at specialty auctions with strong provenance documentation attached to the sale, since paperwork alone can add thousands to the final hammer price. The appreciation comes from low production numbers combined with genuine racing pedigree that cannot be manufactured after the fact, no matter how good the marketing department is. It commemorated an actual championship on an actual race-winning platform, and collectors of that specific American racing era will pay serious money for the real thing, rather than a tribute built decades later. The catch, and it is a significant one, is that fakes exist in real numbers, repainted from ordinary KZ1000s, convincingly enough to fool a casual buyer completely, sometimes even fooling buyers who consider themselves experts. There's one specific frame stamp that separates a genuine ELR from an imposter, and buyers who did not know where to look have paid full price, sometimes even a premium, for bikes worth a fraction of that number. This brings us to a bike with an engine layout so strange even Honda never dared build it again after this one, despite decades of engineering advancement that would have made a modern version genuinely feasible. Flexing needlessly at number 12, Honda CBX1000. In 1979, Honda did something almost nobody asked for and almost nobody expected from a mainstream manufacturer at the time. They put a 6-cylinder engine in a motorcycle. Not 4 cylinders, already exotic enough for the era. Not a V-twin, which would have been the sensible choice for a company watching its budget. 6 transversely mounted, an explosion of chrome header pipes wrapped around the front wheel like nothing else on the road, then or now. The engine is a 1,047 cubic centimeter air-cooled inline-6, producing roughly 105 horsepower, an absurd figure for a production street bike at that point in history. It launched at around $4,500. Today, well-kept examples command $12,000 to $18,000, depending on originality and condition of the original chrome work, which is notoriously expensive to restore correctly once it starts pitting. The CBX was built as a technological flex, not a rational business decision driven by market research or sales projections from some committee. Honda never made anything like it again, not once, in the decades since it went out of production entirely, despite periodic rumors of a revival that never materialized into anything real. There is no successor to compare it against, no lineage to trace forward through later model years. It exists in complete isolation as an engineering statement, frozen in time, unrepeated and unrepeatable, a monument to a period when manufacturers built things simply because they could. An engine layout this unrepeatable does not stay cheap forever once collectors realize nothing like it is coming back from any manufacturer. But there is a specific mechanical weakness buried inside that 6-cylinder head that almost nobody mentions when listing one for sale, and it is exactly the kind of detail that separates an $18,000 bike from a very expensive paperweight sitting in a garage. This is precisely why our next entry rewrote sport bike engineering entirely to avoid a similar fate decades later, taking a completely different approach to the same fundamental problem. Rewriting everything at number 11, Yamaha YZF-R1 The original 1998 R1 did not just sell well, it rewrote the entire architecture of the modern sport bike within a couple of product cycles, forcing every competitor to respond or fall behind immediately in the marketplace. Yamaha stacked the gearbox vertically behind the crankshaft instead of beside it, shortening the whole engine dramatically and freeing up chassis geometry nobody else had access to before. The engine is a 998 cubic centimeters liquid-cooled inline-4, making around 150 horsepower. Original price was $10,199, unmodified. First-year examples now fetch $12,000 to $18,000, sometimes more for genuinely untouched units with matching original components throughout, right down to the factory exhaust and unmodified bodywork panels. Most of these were ridden hard, crashed, and modified into oblivion by riders who bought them purely to go fast without thinking twice about future resale value at the time. That is exactly why the tiny handful of untouched originals are climbing so aggressively right now, as buyers realize how few actually survived intact this whole time, with some estimates suggesting fewer than a couple hundred genuinely unmolested examples remain worldwide. Here's the twist though. The single most valuable R1 variant is not the fastest one, or even the cleanest one. It is a specific trim most buyers overlook entirely because it looks nearly identical to the standard bike at a casual glance across a parking lot. The next bike on our list proves that being ahead of your time can make dealers nervous enough to almost refuse selling it in the first place. This is a problem that eventually solved itself once the design aged into something people finally understood. Terrifying dealers at number 10, Suzuki Katana GSX-1100S. Styled by Hans Muth and looking like nothing else on the road. In 1981, the Katana was so aggressively futuristic that Suzuki's own dealers were reportedly nervous stocking it, genuinely worried customers would find the styling too strange to actually purchase and take home. The engine is a 1,074 cubic centimeter air-cooled inline-4, making around 111 horsepower. Original MSRP sat around $4,200. Clean original examples now trade between $15,000 and $20,000, depending on how original the bodywork remains after all these decades of sun exposure and questionable garage storage. The Katana's design is now considered so iconic that Suzuki literally brought the name back decades later for a modern retro model, borrowing its design cachet outright to sell an entirely new generation of buyers who never saw the original. When a manufacturer resurrects a name 40 years later purely to trade on it, that tells you the original became design history, not just old inventory gathering dust. Design history is powerful currency in this hobby, arguably more powerful than raw performance numbers ever were. But the very first prototype sketches for this bike looked almost nothing like what eventually reached showrooms, and the story of what changed along the way explains exactly why collectors chase this specific silhouette so hard today. That sets up our next entry, an Italian twin that appreciated for reasons that have nothing to do with looks at all, and everything to do with a level of craftsmanship modern manufacturing simply refuses to justify anymore. Lacquering. Obsessively at number 9, BMW R90S. Before BMW built touring barges aimed squarely at comfort over speed, they built the R90S, a genuinely fast, genuinely gorgeous boxer twin with a smoked orange to black paint fade that took 30 layers of hand-applied lacquer to finish correctly. Nobody does that anymore, anywhere, at any price point in modern production, because the labor cost alone would be absurd. The engine is an 898 cubic centimeters air-cooled boxer twin making around 67 horsepower. It launched around $3,400. Today, it commands $18,000 to $25,000, depending heavily on paint condition, specifically more than almost any mechanical factor you could name, which surprises plenty of buyers walking in expecting the engine to matter most. This is a labor appreciation story above everything else on this list, maybe the purest example of it. BMW eventually simplified that paint process on later models purely for cost reasons, meaning that exact fade will genuinely never be replicated at scale again by anyone in the industry, no matter the budget. The remaining question is how many painters who actually knew that 30-layer process by hand are even still alive today? And the honest answer is far fewer than you would guess sitting here. This is precisely why our next bike, terrifyingly dangerous and proudly so, became legendary for the exact opposite reason entirely, proving that notoriety can be just as valuable as elegance in this hobby. Killing casually at number 8, Kawasaki Mach III H1500. In 1969, Kawasaki strapped a violently aggressive two-stroke triple into a chassis that frankly could not handle the power it was putting down. And the result terrified an entire generation of riders in the most memorable way imaginable at the time. The engine is a 499cc air-cooled two-stroke triple producing around 60 horsepower, which sounds tame until you remember the bike weighed under 400 pounds wet with a fuel tank full to the brim. Original price was $999. Restored examples today sell for $10,000 to $15,000, sometimes considerably more, depending on documented history and how many original panels remain unrestored underneath. Like the RD before it, two-stroke street triples are simply gone from modern production permanently, with no realistic path back given current global emissions frameworks across every major market. But the H1 carries extra weight because of its reputation specifically, earning nicknames like Widowmaker for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with marketing exaggeration or hype dreamed up by an ad agency. There is one surviving factory test rider who reportedly refused to open the throttle fully even during official testing sessions. And that single detail tells you everything about why infamous, dangerous machines from a banned category become the most desirable relics of all decades later. That sets up a smaller, arguably safer two-stroke motorcycle that appreciated for the exact same regulatory reason driving this entire list, though its story unfolds with considerably less drama attached to it. Sit tight, we are closing in on our next entry. Exiting abruptly at number 7, Yamaha RZ350. The RZ350 arrived in 1984 as basically the last gasp of the sporty, two-stroke street bikes sold in America before emissions rules shut the door completely and permanently on the entire category, nationwide, with no grace period offered to anyone. The engine is a 347 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled two-stroke twin, making around 47 horsepower, remarkably potent for its featherweight curb weight and relatively small displacement number. Original MSRP was around $2,399. Today, well-preserved examples fetch $10,000 to $14,000, occasionally more for verified low-mileage survivors that have somehow avoided decades of hard riding entirely. This is the clearest example on the whole list of last-of-its-kind pricing, with almost no ambiguity involved whatsoever in the story behind it. There was quite literally no direct successor sold in the American market once it exited production for good, ending an entire lineage in one model year. Yamaha reportedly built a follow-up prototype that never saw daylight once regulators made their intentions unmistakably clear to every manufacturer at once. Knowing a road-legal successor was killed before ever reaching a showroom is exactly the kind of detail that explains why our next bike, an Italian legend built by a company constantly flirting with bankruptcy, became so wildly valuable almost entirely by accident. Surviving barely at number 6, Ducati 900 SS Bevel Drive. Before Ducati went mainstream, they built small numbers of bevel drive Desmodromic V-Twin S by hand inside a factory that was, by most accounts, chronically underfunded and barely profitable from one fiscal year to the next, sometimes barely surviving at all. The engine is an 864cc air-cooled L-twin using Ducati's signature Desmodromic valve system, a mechanically complex arrangement that forces valves shut rather than relying on ordinary springs, a design philosophy few other manufacturers ever bothered replicating at this price point. New, it retailed around $3,500. Today, correctly restored examples trade between $20,000 and $28,000, sometimes higher for documented race history. The bevel drive era ended when Ducati switched to belt-driven camshafts purely for cost-cutting reasons during a particularly rough financial stretch for the company. Meaning every bevel twin represents a mechanical design the company itself deliberately abandoned and never revisited afterward, even once the company's finances eventually stabilized under new ownership years later. Add genuinely tiny production numbers from a manufacturer that nearly went under multiple times that decade, and survival itself was never guaranteed for these bikes in the first place, let alone the kind of collector demand they enjoy today. What most buyers do not realize is that a batch of these engines was almost melted down for scrap during one particularly desperate financial stretch, saved only because a factory worker quietly hid the crates instead of following the disposal order. It sounds invented, but it genuinely gets repeated by marque historians to this day. This sets up our next entry perfectly, a bike that became legendary purely for being first. Inventing outright at number 5, Honda CB750 K0. We are not talking about the ultra-rare sandcast units that sell for the price of an actual house. Those live in a completely different universe of collecting entirely. We are talking about the standard early production CB750, the bike that literally invented the term superbike in mainstream usage, sold to regular customers in 1969 and 1970 without much fanfare at launch. The engine is a 736 cubic centimeters air-cooled inline-4, a genuinely revolutionary configuration for a mass-production street bike at that exact point in history. Original price was around $1,495, a genuine fortune for an ordinary working rider back in 1969. Solid, honest, non-sandcast examples now sell for $12,000 to $18,000, occasionally more for exceptional survivors with original paperwork intact. Every single modern four-cylinder motorcycle you have ever ridden owes something to this bike directly, whether the manufacturer admits it or not. It was the first disc-braked, electric start, four-cylinder machine most riders had ever encountered inside a showroom. And first of its kind, historically significant, still findable, is possibly the most reliable appreciation formula in this entire hobby. Full stop. If being first is worth that much on its own merit, imagine what happens when a bike is first and absurdly limited in numbers simultaneously. This is exactly the situation waiting in our next entry, a bike Suzuki barely built enough of to matter at the time. Hiding rarely at number 4, Suzuki GSXR 750 Limited Edition. In 1986, Suzuki built a small batch of GSXR 750s upgraded with a dry clutch, a lightweight aluminum fuel tank, and aggressive flat-slide Mikuni carburetors, essentially a street-legal endurance racer sold to the public in tiny numbers nobody fully appreciated at the time of purchase. The engine is a 749cc oil and air-cooled inline-4. Original MSRP was approximately $6,499. Today, verified limited edition examples trade between $18,000 and $25,000, occasionally higher at specialist auctions. This bike essentially invented the modern race replica sport bike category as we understand it today, setting the template every manufacturer eventually copied. The limited edition variant represents Suzuki's most track-focused vision of that idea, built in numbers small enough that most riders alive today have literally never stood next to one in person, let alone ridden one. If you have made it this far, drop a comment telling us which bike on this list you actually owned or wish you had bought new, because we read every comment and it shapes exactly what we cover in future videos on this channel. Out-engineering Honda at number 3, Kawasaki Z1 Kawasaki built the Z1 as their answer to Honda's CB750, and in several meaningful ways, they actually out-engineered it entirely, which nobody quite expected at the time. Double overhead cams, a genuine 130 mph top speed. At the time, simply the fastest production motorcycle money could buy anywhere on Earth. The engine is a 903 cubic centimeter air-cooled inline-4, making around 82 horsepower. Original price in 1972 was around $1,895. A genuinely competitive figure for the fastest bike money could buy at the time. Pristine, especially early candy tone paint scheme. Examples now trade between $18,000 and $28,000 depending on documentation and originality. The Z1 is widely credited as the first true DOHC Japanese superbike, and it directly inspired an entire generation of Kawasaki engines that followed for decades afterward across multiple model lines. Early paint schemes were only produced for a short window before Kawasaki changed suppliers entirely, meaning specific early colorways are now hunted the way collectors hunt first-pressing vinyl records from a favorite band. A first-of-its-kind engine architecture combined with a short-lived paint scheme is basically a perfect storm for appreciation. And there is a specific frame number range collectors treat as the true holy grail within this model. That single detail turns an already valuable bike into something considerably rarer still. This brings us to a modern Ducati that already doubled in value within most of our own lifetimes, a time frame short enough that plenty of you watching this video probably remember it being sold new off the showroom floor. Stumbling initially at number 2, Ducati Polesmart 1000 LE. Released in 2006, this bike almost did not happen at all. Ducati built it as a tribute to Paul Smart's 1972 Imola victory, painted in that unmistakable sea green livery, and honestly, it sold slowly at first, sitting on dealer floors longer than Ducati ever expected or budgeted for. The engine is a 992 cc air-cooled L-twin. Original price was $13,995. Today, clean examples are selling for $25,000 to $38,000, occasionally more for exceptional low-mileage units. Slow initial sales meant a genuinely short production run, and short production runs age extremely well once demand eventually catches up decades later, which is exactly what happened here. The retro styling wave this bike helped kick off became one of the biggest trends in modern motorcycling across every major manufacturer, and the Polesmart is widely credited as the machine that started that entire movement single-handedly, inspiring nearly every retro-styled release that followed it across the entire industry. It is genuinely rare to see a bike less than 20 years old already worth nearly triple its original sticker price, which tells you exactly how much collectors value a bike that launched a whole design movement rather than just following one. And that brings us to the single most significant appreciation story on this entire list, a bike so important to racing history that Honda basically hand-built it for one purpose only, with almost no regard for what it would cost the company to produce each individual unit. Dominating purely at number 1, Honda VFR750R. Honda built this bike for one reason: to satisfy world superbike homologation rules so they could legally go racing against everyone else on the grid. Every unit was essentially hand-assembled by Honda's racing division, using a gear-driven V4 engine, titanium connecting rods, and a single-sided swing arm unlike anything else sitting on a showroom floor in 1988, at a time when most manufacturers were still bolting together conventional twin-shock frames. The engine is a 748 cubic centimeters liquid-cooled V4. Original price was $15,000, a staggering amount of money for a motorcycle at the time, roughly triple what most competing bikes cost. Today, verified original examples sell for $40,000 to $100,000, depending heavily on mileage and originality of the components. This is not a bike Honda built to make money, and everyone involved in the program knew that going in. It was built to win races, sold to the public purely because the rulebook required a minimum number of road-going units to exist at all before homologation could be granted. That single fact, an entire motorcycle engineered around regulations rather than a sales target, is exactly why it sits at number 1 on this list, above every other bike we have covered today, because nothing else here was built with quite that level of pure, uncompromising racing intent. Click on the next video to continue the ride. Never buy the wrong bike again? Get your guide right now and subscribe to our channel.